And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing weakening front here, bringing clouds and showers to the southeast coast, all the way up to about Yakutat. Dry over the interior, diminishing scattered and isolated thunderstorms here on the east side. And out over the Bering Sea, widespread area of light rain, fog, and drizzle here from about the Pribilofs down to the eastern Aleutians, in across Bristol Bay to Kodiak Island, and along the southwest coast. And a weak warm front out here. We'll see weekends for tomorrow, and really isn't much of a factor at all. This low here just north of the Alaska Peninsula keeps it wet and unsettled here. Eastern Aleutians into Bristol Bay. Looks like some rain into Kodiak Island, possibly into southern Cook Inlet and across Iliamna Lake, Kamishak Bay, and the western Alaska Range. Mostly cloudy southern Alaska with scattered showers. Isolated thunderstorms again here over portions of interior Alaska, especially up along the Brooks Range there. Maybe the Copper River Basin, mostly cloudy with a few scattered and isolated showers over the southeast coast. And then this system here tracks northeastward and keeps it cloudy and showery over the Panhandle on Monday. And also kind of a little bit more widespread area of showers and isolated thunderstorms here for the northern Susitna Valley up to the Haisley, Nanana area, northeastward there across the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country, possibly as far south as Paxson in the Copper River Basin. Low pressure south of the Alaska Peninsula produces rain there right on up into Kodiak Island. And pretty dry over the northern half of the state here with some sunshine and high pressure, keeping it quiet out over the Bering Sea. Way out west there, a little bit of an increase in the winds and precipitation with that front pushing into Shemya and Attu. Coastal water forecast on the south coast of the Panhandle tomorrow. South to southeast winds 10 to 15 knots, east to northeast at 10 knots on the central coast, and northeast to southeast at 10 on the north coast. Lynn Canal, southeast at 15 knots with 3-foot seas. And for the Stevens Passage area, east winds 10 knots, southeast winds 20 knots for Clarence Strait. And then for Monday, Clarence Strait, southeast at about 15 knots, central northern inside channel, south at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. West winds 20 knots there into Prince of Wales Island. Otherwise, the central coastal area is looking at south at about 15 knots with 5-foot seas, turning southeast at 15 up along the north coast. Cook Inlet tomorrow, light variable wind conditions with slight seas. East winds 20 knots for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, northeast at 20 for the western North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, variable winds at about 10 knots with 2-foot seas, and east winds 15 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And for the day Monday, Prince William Sound here, variable winds at 10 knots, variable at 10 for the eastern North Gulf Coast. South 15 for the western North Gulf Coast, southeast 15 knots, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet south to southwest 15 knots, seas at about 4 feet. Kodiak Island, east to northeast winds for Sunday, 15 to 20 knots, the Alaska Peninsula south to southwest at 15 knots, south 15 for Bristol Bay, east 15 for Bristol Bay. And then on Monday, no change there, east winds 15 knots for Bristol Bay with northwest to east winds here at 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Kodiak Island, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. And for Sunday, eastern Aleutians, west-southwest winds 15 to 25 knots. Western Aleutians here, west to southwest or northwest winds at 15 to 20 knots. And west-northwest at 20 to 25 knots for Adak and Atka. And then for the day Monday, eastern Aleutians, northwest winds 20 knots. Central Aleutians, west winds at 15 knots. And the western Aleutians, that front starting to affect the area west of Kiska Island there. Look for small craft advisories for southeast winds at 25 knots. Seas a little higher now at 8 to 10 feet. And for the southwest coast here, we're looking at east to northeast winds tomorrow, 10 to 15 knots. Pribilof Islands will have the strongest winds from the northeast at 20 knots. St. Matthew Island north at 15. 10 to 15 knot winds for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. 10 to 15 knot winds out of the northwest for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound on Monday. And variable winds at 10 knots here for the southwest coast. Northwest at 15 for the Pribilof. South winds 20 knots for St. Matthew Island with 7-foot seas. And for the central and eastern Arctic coast tomorrow, west winds at 10 knots. West side north at 10, Chuck CC north to northwest at 10 to 15 knots. And for Monday, light variable winds here for the Arctic coast at 5 to 10 knots, and the Chuck CC light west breeze at 10 knots.